Professor Silliman, get in the picture. Get in the picture.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Don't worry.
Yeah. Fine. Maybe it's what you Le diré a la gente que vaya.
Yes, because we're gonna have the video conference to have question and answers.
If you can help us with that, if he wants to do that, perfect. What we're gonna do is we're gonna put the podium over there so people can come and they can be tape it so Marcel can see that. So if you want to moderate it, or Professor Silliman. Okay. But won't that put him on the spot? I mean, is he willing to do it?
It's a deep and distinct pleasure for me to welcome all of you to this program this afternoon. And the fact that so many of you are here underscores the importance of this whole question of what's going on in Venezuela to world events. My purpose is only to introduce Clara and Federico because they are the program. But let me try to, what we call, frame the issue. The world's attention, particularly over the last several days, has been riveted on Iraq. And it will probably not be too long before we see the commencement of combat activities in that country, with all the risks attendant that type of an operation. But Venezuela is a country that is of increasing importance to the United States and to the international community, if only for its potential for creating instability in the world. These two folks know a whole lot more about the regime of Hugo Chavez than I do. But I think that the danger that he poses has been understated in the media of this country and the media of most Western countries. It has long been thought, even by our administration in this country, the Bush administration, and I would suggest even the Clinton administration before that, that the very strident rhetoric of Chavez has seldom been carried out in his actions. And therefore the threat, if anything, may be hypothetical rather than actual. I think that's an incorrect assessment. We have seen, particularly in the last few years, his attempts to bring the economy of Venezuela under total state control. We have seen over the last several years an attempt to totally destroy the independent media. And we have seen in the last few years an attempt to totally defeat the opposition movement in that country. And yet we read and we hear little about it. hence the great significance of what we're about to hear this afternoon. Now, from my perspective in dealing with national security matters, I see the threat evidenced in really two aspects. You all have heard much lately about the potential for terrorism and terrorist threats in this country, especially now that we are at a level of Code Orange. And if any of you watched the presentation by Secretary of State Bush in the Security Council a few weeks ago, you may agree or disagree that his attempt to prove a direct linkage between al-Qaeda in Iraq might have been proven and might not have been proven. There is no question, however, about the linkage between Hugo Chavez and countries that actually demonstrably promote terrorism. And I'm talking specifically about Cuba, and I'm talking about Libya, and I'm talking about Iran. So if we lull ourselves into a false sense of security in looking eastward and saying that we're concerned about terrorist cells that are being formed and planning attacks in Europe and in the Arab countries, then I think we are looking too far. We need to look south, and I think we need to be very, very concerned about the continuing and increasing ties with Castro, with Gaddafi, and with other leaders that would promote terrorism and attack us. Secondly, much has been made of the United States' actions with regard to the question of oil, and it would be naive for us to suggest that the tremendous oil resources and productivity in Venezuela, its state economy depending upon it, are not in our vital interests. And particularly as we deal with what may or may not happen in Iraq as we engage in combat activities, the capability of Venezuela to produce oil in a world that seems has an insatiable appetite for oil consumption is another extremely valuable factor. There are many more, but I point out those two. But as I mentioned at the beginning, I'm only a distant observer. Federico and Clara know it far better than any of us. And so at this point, I'd like to turn the program over to them, and we welcome your views, both of you.
Thank you, Professor Silliman. I'm glad to see so many faces. That means that this topic is important to you or that you like Venezuelan chocolates and coffee. My name is Federico Lander. I'm a student here at Duke Law. And I just want to introduce the two remaining people that will be talking to you today. One is Clara Granier. She's a candidate at the Sanford Institute, and she's also a Duke LLM. She's going to be talking briefly about the current crisis in Venezuela and about Hugo Chavez and how he got into power. And afterwards, we're going to show a video about Mr. Marcel Granier, a CEO of Radio Caracas Televisión, RCTV, where he responds to accusations made to him by Hugo Chavez. Marcel Granier is a lawyer. He has several publications regarding legal, political, and economical matters. Has been always committed to education and the community in Venezuela, and he has occupied important positions in different public and private institutions and organizations related to government, media, culture, and businesses. So now I just have to thank Lisa and Dean Horowitz for the help and for the sponsorship of the Business Law Society, the Federalist Society, the Hispanic Law Students Association, the Office of International Studies, and for the International Law Society. I will leave you with Clara.
Good afternoon. Venezuela is the oldest democracy in Latin America. It enjoyed a stable political system for the past 45 years. Yet, in the year 1992, such stability was shaken. That year, there were two failed coup d'etat attempts, commanded the first directly, the second indirectly because he was in jail, by Hugo Chavez. As I said, both failed. 6 years later, however, in 1998, Chavez entered the democratic game and assumed power after a democratic election. He was elected with a significant popular support, and after his triumph, his popularity rose to almost 80%. He no longer enjoys such support. Since he took office 4 years ago, Hugo Chavez has attempted to install an autocratic regime, which has repeatedly violated the Constitution and the separation of powers, eliminating any kind of check and balance system. In doing so, he has promoted the militarization of the public administration and the politicization of the armed forces, perverting the civilian nature of government. He has also inculcated violence in our society. On November 27, 2001, he said, and I quote, "This revolution is peaceful but armed. Let no one make the wrong assumption. And when I say armed, I'm not being metaphorical. No, when I say armed, I mean rifles and rocket launchers and tanks and airplanes and thousands of armed men. That's what I mean." End of quote. I have chosen today what I consider some of the most important facts to share with you so that you can understand what's going on. The first one is poverty. Since Chavez first took office, the percentage of people in extreme poverty has risen more than 17%, so that in Venezuela, the extreme poor now consist of 34% of the population. President Chavez, not even with record high oil prices, has been able to achieve economic growth. The prior president dealt with a $9 per barrel price, while President Chavez has dealt with an oil barrel of up to $30. However, the accumulated drop of the GDP in the year 2002, including oil and non-oil sectors, was 9%, and the per capita product has fallen 16.4%. Moreover, the nation's international reserves in the year 2002 dropped by 20%. The unemployment has reached also at 20%, and of the percentage employed, more than 50% belongs to the informal sector. Second is the criminality. Criminality has risen especially in 2002. Last year, there were 9,000 homicides, and 80% of the assassins are still on the streets. To make this example more understandable, during the 8 years of the Vietnam War, from August 1964 until March 1973, there were more than 58,000 American soldiers killed in the war. That is 6,800 dead soldiers per year. In Venezuela, from 1999 to 2002, that is 4 years, there were 31,577 Venezuelans assassinated. That is an average of 7,800 deaths per year. Corruption. Among multiple cases, there is the mismanagement of public funds. In 3 years, the country has received over $125 billion in oil revenues. No particular investment has been made, and we're facing the worst fiscal crisis in the past 100 years. There are also $3 billion from public funds unaccounted for. The creation of Bolivarian circles. These are groups of people whose purpose is to unite and organize the popular masses in order to guarantee, enhance, and defend the revolution. They are copied from the Cuban model. Such circles, also called circles of terror, have been organized by the government, and there is clear evidence that they are heavily armed and that their members are being trained in paramilitary and terrorist activities by military personnel and Cuban advisors brought to Venezuela by Fidel Castro and Hugo Chavez. President Chavez has often publicly incited them to commit crimes when he has ordered them to defend his revolution with weapons or whatever means are available to them, as he has said, and to carry out acts of intimidation and violence against the opposition and the media. The following video will show you some of their actions. Human rights. A Venezuelan scholar and former Inter-American Court of Human Rights judge, Asdrúbal Aguiar, has documented 34 constitutional violations by the Chavez government. Among them, ordering the military to disregard any judicial decision contravening Chavez's direct orders. Friendships. As Professor Silliman said, there is no secret in the government alliances with countries like Cuba, Libya, Iran, and Iraq, as well as with terrorist groups like the Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces, or FARC. There is also evidence of Al-Qaeda members in the island of Margarita, Venezuelan territory. An interesting fact is that currently, Cuba is receiving more money from the Venezuelan government than one of Venezuela's most important states, Zulia, which has a constitutional right to a share of the national treasury funds. Peaceful demonstrations. All of these abuses, as well as an unbearable economic crisis, led to the organization of the people who have taken the streets to protest in massive numbers and multiple opportunities. On April 11, 2002, Chavez was ousted from power after the greatest demonstration in Latin American history was broken up by persons tied to the government and members of security state corps. At least 19 people were killed and several hundred were wounded. In response to such atrocity, the high military command demanded Chavez's resignation, which he accepted. He returned to power after 47 hours. A referendum. Considering the government has lost legitimacy in the eyes of the Venezuelan people, the civil society has organized itself to demand a constitutional and electoral solution to the worst political crisis of the last 45 years. To do so, a negotiation process between the government and the opposition has been put into practice. They have agreed, as established in the Constitution, to hold a referendum on August 2003, to which President Chavez has publicly accepted in multiple opportunities, nationally and internationally. However, he has also stated, after accepting to comply with the referendum, that even if 90% of the people vote him out of power, he won't leave. Media. All of these abuses have not gone unnoticed. The media, and through the media, they have been steadily denounced. In doing so, the media has become the receiver of multiple aggressions. Some have said that the private media has been impartial, when in reality, there hasn't been information equilibrium from the public sector, and especially from President Chavez, who has used the state-owned media as his personal forum where he delivers endless speeches whenever he feels like it and attacks anyone who opposes him, not letting the opposition use the same forum to respond to the accusations or to portray their point of view as in any democracy. With President Chavez in control of all the branches of government, the common citizen has nowhere to go in order to enforce his rights. He is therefore left without any other option than to go to the media in order to have his case heard. From 1999 to 2003, there have been more than 600 attacks against journalists, their working material, and the media stations. Now we have to see our news at, let's say, noon, with our journalists with masks that protects them from tear gas, with bulletproof vests. More than 60 assaults and threats against reporters in January 2003 alone. Such abuses have been denounced in the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, to which the Venezuelan government has said, the Commission's efforts are, and I quote, an attempt to interfere in Venezuela's internal affairs. The government has been threatening the newspapers, TV, and radio stations. Chavez has repeatedly declared that he will withdraw their broadcasting licenses without due process of law. He has proposed a new law to restrict freedom of speech. The so-called content law dictates the content of what should be broadcasted and establishes strict schedule restrictions, which could prevent the networks from transmitting live news, among others. Now let's hear what Marcel Granier, CEO of Radio Caracas Television, the oldest and largest TV station in Venezuela, had to say when he was verbally attacked by President Chavez. Thank you.
Good evening to all our viewers and friends of RCTV. During his accustomed weekly show, Hello, Mr. President, the President of Venezuela, Lieutenant Colonel Hugo Rafael Chavez, formulated serious criticism against the Venezuelan TV stations and referred to the various boards of directors of each station as liars, government overthrowers, terrorists, and manipulators. Also, in his weekly address, the President referred to me personally, so I have decided to respond accordingly to the comments that he so irresponsibly made and furthermore formulated in such a twisted manner.
Realmente está demostrado ante el mundo que los canales de televisión, el 2, ¿cómo se llama?
Radio Caracas.
Radio Caracas Televisión, el 4, Venevisión, el 10, Televen y Globovisión, están concertados en una acción contra el gobierno de Venezuela. Eso escríbalo el mundo, pues. Leyendo la transcripción, creo que se le enredó el papagayo a mis amigos Marcel Granier y, ¿cómo se llama? Mi amigo Rabel. Creo que se les enredó el papagayo.
He states that we at RCTV are liars because we said that he had resigned back in April of 2002. Mr. President, we are not the ones who said that you had resigned. The person who informed the country that you had resigned was the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Lucas Rincon Romero, the most senior officer in the armed forces at that point in time, and the head of the Venezuelan army, who got to that position and that rank, 4 above your own, by the way, because of a decision you made. Because if we had followed and applied the rules set and established by the father of our country, Simón Bolívar, over 200 years ago, General Lucas Rincon Romero would have never achieved that position.
Esos mismos 4 canales le dijeron al mundo grandes mentiras el día del golpe de Estado, que yo había renunciado, por ejemplo.
Well then, it was not RCTV who said you had resigned. It was your highest ranked general, the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General José Lucas Rincon Romero. And for proof, all we have to do is simply watch the video of that day.
Del alto mando militar de la Fuerza Armada de la República Bolivariana de Venezuela deplora los lamentables acontecimientos sucedidos en la ciudad capital en el día de ayer. Ante tales hechos, se le solicitó al señor presidente de la República la renuncia de su cargo, la cual aceptó.
The members of the media, and particularly RCTV, have had a difficult relationship with the seat of power. Governments don't like to be criticized, don't like to be exposed, especially when its record and performance are as poor as your government's. Yours is not the first government we have had problems with. We also had problems with the 2 terms of President Caldera, the 2 terms of President Perez, with the government of President Lucinchi, and with the government of President Herrera. The only one which we had no problems with was the government of Ramón J. Velázquez. Our relationship with you and your government were especially cordial at the onset of your presidential term. It was none other than you that is responsible for systematically and methodically ruining the relationship with the media. How did you do it? I am going to refer to various instances. You continually and flagrantly violate the freedom of expression and the freedom of the press. You have dedicated yourself since the beginning of your presidential term to disqualifying the media in general, to threatening and insulting the media owners, the press corps, and the cameramen. You have done all this through the government's TV station and through your endless radio and TV speeches.
Sean mentirosos, digan la verdad, no les da vergüenza, reconozcan que ustedes, los 4 canales de televisión, y así lo denuncio ante el país y ante el mundo, siguen comprometidos con el golpe, el Canal 2, el Canal 4, el Canal 10 y Globovisión. Sus dueños siguen comprometidos en esta acción desestabilizadora contra el país, contra el pueblo, contra las leyes, contra la República. Lo sigo denunciando ante el país y ante el mundo entero.
You continually use the same words you so irresponsibly used yesterday. Words such as liars, government overthrowers, terrorists. You have never been able to prove anything. But you insist in hurling these baseless accusations, giving a green light to gangs of government-backed thugs who, through intimidation and sheer terror, continually harass the journalists, cameramen, reporters, and media owners throughout Venezuela. You have systematically violated the guarantee of the basic principle of political pluralism. You do not accept any political party that is not your own. That is not democratic, Mr. President. In every democracy, there must be various political parties. They must not be persecuted by the government. A government that dedicates itself to persecuting rival political parties, like your government does, stops being democratic, just like your government has ceased being democratic. You have in a continuous and perseverant manner tried to violate the principle of separation and independence of public powers. That is why we see the Attorney General's office, the General Controller's office, and other public institutions as practically non-existent. The Supreme Court, for example, is considered and lauded by yourself as the best in the world when it rules in your favor. When it dares to rule against your interests, it is referred to in such vulgar terms I rather not repeat.
Ellos pusieron la plasta que pusieron y se fueron de vacaciones. Porque lo que pusieron fue una plasta. Y entonces se fueron de vacaciones. ¡Qué sabroso!
The same occurs or applies to the National Assembly, our Congress, which you pretended to be an appendix of your personal and political interests. You have violated the principle of constitutional subordination for all the government institutions to the civil authorities that were legally constituted. Your political process is based on a civil-military alliance that does not exist. In no democracy is such an alliance acceptable. You have twisted the purpose of the armed forces. The role of the armed forces is to defend the integrity and sovereignty of the Venezuelan territory, which, by the way, at this precise moment, is in very bad shape due to the continuous penetration of the terrorist Colombian guerrillas into Venezuelan soil, the incursion of which is encouraged by your government. The armed forces also have the duty to preserve and protect the lives and property of all its citizens, duty which is not complying with at this point in time because you have elected and insisted on having them play a role associated with your political project. You have been eroding at the core of the armed forces. You have chosen to ignore the merit system and chains of command that should exist in every armed force. The system for promotions is based on loyalty to your political agenda and not on hard work, the performance of your constitutional duty, or merit.
Sino por fidelidad a su pensamiento político, por fidelidad a su partido político.
You systematically and continuously violate the principle of transparency in government activity.
Transparencia de las actividades gubernamentales.
Nowadays, it is impossible to know the destination of public funds that have been entrusted to your administration.
A su administración.
Scandals such as the one with the FIEM, where over $3 billion have disappeared, these irregularities have not been explained or these monies accounted for, even though everybody knows who is responsible. In these cases, the buck stops with you, Mr. President. You have been elected as the trustee of the public treasury. You violate the principle of government accountability in public affairs. You were elected because the Venezuelan people believed in good faith that you would fight corruption. During your government, corruption has increased hundredfold, and the worst corruption cases ever, not only in Venezuela but in Latin America, have occurred during your government. The investigation towards these cases has been practically impossible because the Attorney General and the Comptroller have not been complying with their duties, and your government officials have been hiding the evidence. You and your government are a clear and classic example of irresponsible and incompetent performance of your public duties. We have never seen the likes of such a fraudulent management of public funds, like we have seen in your government. The way you finance the circles of terror, who are gangs of government-backed thugs. The way you finance organized groups to instill terror. It is unforgivable the way you try to force on the population as a whole a way of political thinking that is foreign to us all. These monies have originated in the national coffers, which were entrusted to you according to our Constitution and the laws of the Republic. You have disrespected the social rights of the Venezuelan people. Multiple programs that were in place to attend the needs of the poorest of all Venezuelans have been dismantled in a most irresponsible manner by your government. One of the most important social projects, called social prevention, is 4 years behind schedule due to the irresponsible manner and lack of professionalism your government has showed on the matter. You have broken the law in every sense of the word. Yesterday, we saw with indignation how you incited military officers added to your political agenda to ignore decisions by the courts.
No podemos permitir que venga un juez por allá, aliado con un gobernador de oposición, como el caso de Carabobo y Zulia, unos jueces allí, ¿no? Que, bueno, tienen compromisos políticos con un partido o con un gobernador, y entonces llegan a tratar de impedir la aplicación de un decreto presidencial. Pues no lo pueden lograr. Por ahí en alguna región llegó un fiscal a tratar de evitar que un cuerpo militar cumpliera unas instrucciones dadas por el presidente de la República. Le dije al general, pues no le haga caso.
This is not acceptable in a democracy. It violates all the principles of a democratic regime, and this is totally unacceptable. You have violated the political campaign laws by utilizing public and obscure private funds, which went unreported. You have blocked public funds for other political parties, and you have impeded political parties from using the government television station or other mass media. You have prevented all forms of social participation that are not akin to your political process. You have had access to great wealth. You have used it to foment non-governmental organizations associated with your political agenda, but you have not done the same for the ones belonging to the opposition. Here in Venezuela, you only accept one school of thought. That is the one that agrees to your political process only. You want Venezuela to become a country of compliant sheep, subject to your ideology, full of anachronisms, foreign to our traditions and to our
La
history.
discriminación y la
You have
intolerancia,
promoted discrimination and intolerance by using a language based on hate. Each time you address a person or institution that has had the gall to dissent from your political views, such as political parties, workers' unions and guilds, you immediately disqualify them by tilting them as rotten. Tumors when referring to the Venezuelan Catholic Church. You also call others traitors, mafiosi, Pharisee.
No a los escuálidos solamente, sino a los que le dan voz y amplifican y sobredimensionan la importancia de los escuálidos y sus escualideces.
Y nosotros no podemos permitir que una cúpula, que una verdadera madriguera, los sindicatos comiencen a chantajearnos y a presionarnos.
Y al pretendido autobloqueo de una quinta columna de traidores a la patria, todas esas mafias o esos grupos, ¿no?
You have no right to call anyone in that manner. You are the president of all Venezuelans. Please have some respect, so people can have some respect for you. You have prevented the full and efficient exercise of workers' rights. You have blocked pensions funds and are 4 years behind on the project of establishing such funds. You have brought on more poverty than any government before you. During your tenure, poverty has doubled. Unemployment, which is one of the foremost responsibilities of a head of state, also has doubled. But corruption, on the other hand, has multiplied hundredfold. You have conscientiously debilitated with clear premeditation the social and democratic cohesiveness and fiber of the nation. Today, Venezuela is very inferior as a country compared to the nation you were entrusted when you assumed the role of head of state. Since the first day of your tenure, you have systematically been an apologist of criminal activity, as long as it is committed by people adept to your political thinking, people related to your political movement. We witnessed yesterday the most heinous of crimes when you order your military cronies to ignore the ruling of any court of the land.
A los militares afectos a su causa, a su partido, a que desconozcan las órdenes de los tribunales.
Last but not least, so as not to make this a never-ending list, you have your hands and your conscience full of the blood of Venezuelans. In February of 1992, when you led a coup attempt, you violated the oath you made and the Constitution of Venezuela in an irresponsible manner. You committed multiple crimes, Mr. President. The same occurred when your political movement, MBR 200, participated in a failed coup attempt on the 27th of November 1992. I can still remember with horror the images in Channel 8, the government station, where your gang of thugs, in a horrendous and vile act, assassinated in cold blood defenseless workers at that TV station.
Hablando del caso Watergate, ¿cuál fue el periódico que llevó adelante lo del caso Watergate? Ajá, entonces sale a relucir el Washington Post. Uno de los dueños de medios aquí, en su defensa, trae, ¿no?, como recurso defensivo el caso del Washington Post, que atacó a un gobierno, qué sé yo. Le dice, sí es verdad, pero el dueño del Washington Post nunca se quedó en un salón como este hablando 3 horas con los periodistas internacionales en contra del gobierno.
In your weekly address, you made a reference to Watergate. During a recent press conference in Caracas, a journalist, I presume from the Washington Post, asked me why we were accusing the government of illegal acts. I asked him what was the attitude of the Washington Post when confronted with Watergate. The journalist, obviously not knowing the Venezuelan situation, said that the difference was that in the Watergate case, the Washington Post had the proof.
Era que en el caso de Watergate, el Washington Post tenía las pruebas.
I have presented
He presentado
17 concrete
17
cases.
señalamientos concretos.
I am now
Voy a
going to
referirme
make
ahora,
reference, since
ya que
you are
ustedes
so
gustan tanto,
interested
les
on the
interesa tanto el
Watergate
caso del
case,
Watergate,
to a brief
alguna
list of
una
accusations
lista
pending
breve
against you
de
in the Supreme
acusaciones
Court
que cursan en su
for a
contra
wide array of
por
crimes,
delitos contra la
some of
fuerza
public
pública
nature,
o por delitos
some against
contra
human
derechos
rights.
humanos en el
You
Tribunal
stand accused
Supremo
of
de Justicia.
misuse of public
Usted ha
funds in
sido
the VM
acusado
case.
por
As I
malversación de
mentioned
fondos
minutes
públicos
ago,
en el caso
over
de
$3 billion American dollars disappeared.
más de
This accusation was
2.430
presented on the 10th of June,
millones de bolívares
2002.
desaparecidos. Ese caso fue presentado el 10 de junio de 2002.
You stand
Usted ha
accused
sido
of
acusado
illegally
de
financing activities
financiamiento
adapt to your
por parte
political
del Estado
agenda.
a actividades
You have
partidistas
also
y
been accused of
político.
political
Ese
proselytism.
caso fue presentado
This
por el
case was
Tribunal
presented
Supremo de
before the
Justicia
Supreme
el
Court
14
on the
de junio
14th of
de
June
2002.
2002.
Usted ha sido acusado
You have
de
been accused of
financiamiento
illegally
de la campaña
financing the
por el
MVR
financiamiento de la
party
campaña
during the
electoral del
electoral
MVR
campaign of
en
1998 with
con donaciones de
donations from
personas
foreign
jurídicas
nationals,
extranjeras,
financing which went
financiamientos
undeclared,
estos que usted
clearly
no declaró
violating the
de
law.
acuerdo a lo que
This
pauta
case
la
was
ley.
presented to the Supreme
Ese
Court
caso
on
fue
the 25th
presentado
of
ante
June
el Tribunal Supremo de
2002.
Justicia el 25 de junio de 2002.
You stand accused,
Usted ha sido
Mr.
acusado,
President,
señor
of crimes
presidente,
against
por
humanity,
delitos por
case
crímenes de
presented
lesa
by the
humanidad,
families of the
caso
victims
presentado
and by
por
the
familiares de
people
las víctimas
of Fuerza
por la Asociación
Integradora.
Civil Fuerza
This case
Integradora.
was presented on the
Este
25th
caso
of
fue
June
presentado el
2002.
25 de junio de 2002.
You stand accused of crimes against the national patrimony in the case of the oil accord with Cuba. The case was presented to the courts on the 26th of June 2002.
Oír a un caballero dueño de una televisora esgrimir la noche de las manifestaciones, diciéndole al país y al mundo que el castrocomunismo no podrá imponerse en Venezuela. Yo dije, oye, pues este hombre está totalmente ido. Y tiene fama de que es un intelectual, ¿no? De que es el de los dueños de los medios. A mí me ha dicho mucha gente, no, este es el hombre con el que se puede hablar, porque es un intelectual, ¿no? Muy leído, escritor. Pero cuando uno lo ve ahí decir, no, el castrocomunismo no podrá imponerse en Venezuela, uno dice, está nocao, pues.
You have the gall to laugh when your government is accused of being influenced and inspired on the Castro communist model. I guess you laugh because, true, in this day and age, it is inconceivable and anachronic to think that there could be any more governments inspired in Castro communism after watching the tremendous failure of Fidel Castro's government. But we Venezuelans have seen your fascination every time you refer to or treat Fidel Castro, and we have seen how Cuban and Libyan gangs have penetrated our Venezuelan armed forces and our oil industry, so as to put those institutions at the service of special interests that are not those of the Venezuelan nation. You stand accused of misuse of public funds in the case of the before-mentioned VM on the 27th of June 2002. Also related to the VM case, you are accused of generic and aggravated misuse of public funds, case presented by the Causa R political party and by the Solidarity political party on the 17th of June 2002. You stand accused of crimes against humanity, case presented by the Mass political party on July 2, 2002. When I stated that both your hands and your conscience were stained with the blood of Venezuelans, I was referring to the two failed coups d'etat on the 4th of February and 27th of November 1992, done both unconstitutionally, illegally, criminally, and with malicious intent. I could have also been referring to the 11th of April 2002, when innocent people died, but also when, fortunately, the armed forces disobeyed your orders to suppress people even further, even though snipers on rooftops surrounding the presidential palace caused 19 deaths. I could also have been referring to the Plaza Altamira case 10 days ago, where 3 Venezuelans were assassinated and over 20 injured by gunfire.
donde con horror
We Venezuelans watched and listened in horror as you defended the assassin less than 2 days after the tragedy. You addressed him as gentleman and sir, when in reality we are talking about a confessed assassin caught in the act.
un asesino confeso capturado infragante.
Pero ya el rostro del señor Gubella pues recorrió el mundo y de inmediato. Porque incluso no basta que alguien diga que él hizo los disparos. No, eso hay que determinarlo. En cuántas ocasiones no ha salido alguien a responsabilizarse por un hecho que no cometió por diversas razones. El señor Gubella llegó a Venezuela desde Portugal en un avión de la línea aérea TAP. O sea, este caballero vino del otro lado del mundo a Venezuela, 24 horas después estaba disparando en la Plaza Altamira. Eso también es extraño, ¿no les parece?
For you, sirs and gentlemen, should be your political peers of this country, the leaders of the Venezuelan Catholic Church, union leaders, and so many other respectable citizens that you so systematically disqualify as enemies.
A la que usted descalifica de una manera sistemática y continua.
You also stand accused of legal use of the military uniform.
Por uso ilegal del uniforme
We all
militar,
remember the variety, the number and the exuberance of all the uniforms you have been illegally using.
y el esplendor de los uniformes.
This lawsuit was introduced on the 9th of July 2002.
Esa demanda fue presentada el 9 de julio de 2002.
You also stand accused in a lawsuit introduced by the Democratic Action political party on the 10th of July 2002 of accepting illegal campaign contributions in the case of the Santander Bank of Spain.
Tanto que criticó usted la corrupción.
Mr. President, you were so critical of corruption, and there you are receiving illegal campaign contributions, hidden from the law, without disclosing it. Campaign contributions in the order of millions of American dollars from the Bilbao Bank and the Santander Bank. How ashamed must the people that voted for you feel, Mr. President? I could continue elaborating on well-documented lawsuits and civil claims against you, all of them with ample proof, but I prefer to end tonight's program here. For over 70 years, both Radio Caracas Radio and Radio Caracas Televisión, RCTV, have been bastion and paradigm of the radio and television industry in Venezuela. We here at RCTV have reported on Venezuelan and world events for over 7 decades. We here at RCTV have opened the doors to everyone. I hereby invite you, Mr. President, if you so wish, to come to RCTV, and we can both sit down and discuss these and any other matter you wish on a special edition of this program, Primer Plano. I will be glad to do it if you so wish. I'll be waiting for you. If you prefer, I could also come to you to the Presidential Palace of Miraflores. Thank you very much, Mr. President. Thank you very much to all of our viewers for tuning in. I hope, if the President accepts my invitation, to see you soon in a special edition of this program, Primer Plano.
I hope you enjoyed the video and learned a little bit more about what's going on in our country. And now we'll have a video conference with Mr. Marcel Granier, and you can ask him whatever questions you wish. Just come forward. I'll start with the first question, and just come forward and ask whatever you want or are interested in. Hello, Mr. Marcel Granier. How are you? We're here.
Thank you. How are you?
Could you repeat the question, please? But President Chavez has never accepted the invitation, and he hasn't been accepting any interviews recently. In the past year, I think no Venezuelan journalist has been able to interview him. He's only accepted interviews by foreign correspondents. The relationship between the media and government right now is quite bad, and the president has been very explicit in saying that he wants to close down some of the TV stations and some of the journals. Could you talk a little further back from the microphone? Well, Venezuela has an important relationship with Brazil, and I think that everybody is expecting the Brazilian government to behave in a democratic fashion. And we are pretty sure that President Lula will live up to those expectations. Thank you. Well, the problem is that Venezuela has had a long tradition of military rule. And since we started, since democracy consolidated itself, the main objective has been to avoid the kind of military autocracy that we see in countries like Libya, Iraq, Iran, and to separate the military from civilian rule and to subject them to the rule of law. President Chavez doesn't believe in that. That's why in 1992 he tried a coup attempt that he had been plotting for more than 10 years. So I think the problem lies in the fact that he is not a true Democrat. He joined the army in order to try a coup d'etat, and he has said so on several occasions, and some of his officers have confessed that as well. He failed the coup in February 92. They tried again in November 92. They failed that. They went to prison. When they came out of prison, their idea was to propose that people don't vote and try to defeat the new government with the fact that there had been a very high degree of abstentions. They failed that as well, and in 1997, somebody convinced him to go to elections, that the best way to win power was through elections. but I believe that he's never been convinced of democracy. He was able to earn a very high return on the election, and so he was fascinated by democracy at the beginning because he had a very high degree of support from the people. When his ratings or his approval rates started going down, then he had to change his attitude. And the media that he loved, when they were covering his meetings and his proposals and all his actions, then became the subject of his disapproval and now of his hatred. The Organization of American States can play a very important role in forcing him to accept what the Constitution says. The Constitution says that when more than 20% of the electorate sign a petition for a referendum, that must be held. And that's what happened. Over 4 million people signed such a petition, and therefore we have the right to go to an early election in August 19. If the proposal for his going out gets more than 3.7 million votes, he will have to leave the presidency. And that's what most people in Venezuela now want to happen.
Percentage of the people in Venezuela live in poverty, and I suppose these people support Chavez, don't they?
To rely on opinion polls for that. According to the opinion polls and to the statistics that we have, around 35% of the people live in poverty, in extreme poverty. That is twice as much as what we had at the beginning of Hugo Chávez's government. According to the polls, over 50% of the people do not approve of his government and would like to replace him by somebody else. Among the poorer people, his ratings are a little bit higher. He goes up to as much as 40%, but you still have more than 55% of very poor people rejecting him. At the beginning of his government, it wasn't so. At the beginning, his ratings, his approval ratings were as high as 80%. People were fascinated by his personality and his speech and well.
Good afternoon, Mr. Marcel. I would like to hear your opinion about the media, the world media coverage of last year April events, and what you would expect from them on current events.
Okay, that's a very interesting case one you're mentioning. September 11 was a crucial dilemma for the media because we are used to be very plural in our coverage. I think that when you feel that your very way of life, your democracy, your life, your values are threatened, then you don't act so pluralistically. So that explains why on most democratic societies, you don't get the Al-Qaeda side. You get the democratic side, because you don't want to give them the opportunity to use the media in order to subvert the very same kind of government values that you want to preserve. And I think we're going to see more of that. I mean, you can be impartial when all people abide by the same law. I mean, in a democratic society, you give the same time, the same opportunity to Democrats and Republicans, to liberals and conservatives. But when you are threatened by a terrorist organization, a dictatorship, when you see that your your most valued beliefs are threatened, then you cannot be impartial, you cannot be so pluralistic.
Hello, sir. Oleg Martin speaking. I was wondering, you were just talking about terrorism and the fact that Chavez seems to be supporting or at least hosting groups like Al-Qaeda. My main question is, how come we can't get the same attention on Venezuela as we're having on Iraq for the moment? I mean, that would be, I think there's a potential to get him out of power, or there's a potential for the opposition to get a huge amount of support from the international community by proving, or at least putting those proofs out there that Al-Qaeda is actually in Venezuela. And I'm wondering why the lack of attention on those subjects.
From political myopia, and we are suffering from some kind of moral myopia as well. We don't have proof that Al-Qaeda is here. We know that a lot of Arab people, Libyans, particularly Libyans, are operating in Venezuela. We know that the government has very close ties with the Colombian guerrilla, with the FARC, and with the Cuban government. But we don't have specific proof that Al-Qaeda is operating here. The problem is the Middle East is, for historical reasons, I guess, the American government has been more interested in what's going on in Iraq, but what's going on in Venezuela could prove very dangerous for the interest of the United States. Why? Well, first of all, Colombia is now being circled by 3 countries that have so far refused to qualify the Colombian guerrilla as a terrorist organization. So we have Colombia surrounded by Venezuela, Brazil, and Ecuador, and none of those 3 countries have been willing to declare that they consider the FARC, the ELN, or the paramilitary as terrorist organizations. The second problem we have, regarding the U.S., is that outside of the Middle East, of the Arabian countries, the largest oil reserves available to the American economy are in Venezuela. And Venezuela, for close to 80 years, was a very reliable supplier to the American economy. No more so. And we have to pay attention to that. Because if anything happens in Iraq, if, for example, there is an uprising in Saudi Arabia, or if there is an uprising in Kuwait, the Venezuelan oil could be very important for the American economy. Right now, the Venezuelan oil is not available because of all that has happened in the past 4 months. So I think it is a case of political myopia not to pay more attention to what's happening here. Then there is another issue I think we could consider. Venezuela was one of the very few oil countries that was able to live and develop a democracy. If you look at countries like Algeria, Libya, Nigeria, Iraq, Iran, Indonesia, you will see that that is not the case in those countries. So it is terrible to see how a democracy that was little by little evolving and that was the longest surviving democracy in Latin America is now being threatened by this kind of populist military regime. And those regimes have a long survival rate. We have seen Gaddafi, he's been in power for more than 30 years. Saddam Hussein has been in power for more than 20 years. So we have to watch that carefully because dictatorships have a contagion effect, particularly in Latin America. Remember the case in the 50s or in the 60s, even the 70s. And Venezuela was a beacon for democracy and was very helpful in bringing democracy back to countries like Salvador or like Nicaragua, Guatemala, Peru, Ecuador, even Chile.
alliance with a lot of the opposition, which I understand has moved to Florida and parts of Miami, or do they have more interest in keeping Chavez in power?
That is, I mean, I hope and I pray that the American government doesn't fall into the trap of believing that since Chavez is a rogue, it's better to deal with him because they know that they have the advantage. And they could convince him to grant oil concessions to big oil companies and to guarantee a reliable supply. I hope that the values of democracy will prevail and that we will be given the opportunity to use the right that the Constitution gives us to have a referendum on August 19. I mean, America has a long democratic tradition. I don't want to believe that they will fall into the trap of people like Somoza or like Trujillo that the State Department favored for so many years before.
Good afternoon, Mr. Granier. It seems that the referendum that it's supposed to be in August is a solution, but the president and the government haven't accepted that, and he publicly said that if even 90% of the population voted against him, he won't leave government. So is there any other alternative or any other solution to this, to the Venezuelan problem in the short term?
You mentioned that he has said that he won't give up power, but he's also said on 22 different occasions, and I can send you the quotes, that he accepts referendum. And he's even accepted in the talks he had with President Carter and President Gaviria that he would accept the referendum on August 19. If that doesn't work, and I hope that we will be able, democracy proves itself through the actions of its citizens. So we have to work very hard to make that referendum happen. If that doesn't happen, we have other democratic options. We can have a constitutional convention. And for that, what we require is, if I remember correctly, we need 15% of approval by the population. We can also try amendments to the Constitution. We can push harder on the more than 20 suits that are going against the president right now. So we have different democratic options to try to make him amend his ways. But you said that the solution lied in August 19. August 19 is an important day, but the solution to Venezuela's problems is not the ousting of Hugo Chavez. I mean, if Hugo Chavez decided to follow the Constitution, to act democratically, to permit the development of political parties, to let the trade unions represent the labor force, to respect the rights of the opposition, then he wouldn't be a problem. If he decided to act against corruption, if he decided to use all the money he's getting from oil right now, and rather than giving it to help the Colombian or the Cuban government to help solve the poverty problems in Venezuela, then he wouldn't be a problem. So our main problem is not Hugo Chavez himself. It's Hugo Chavez's behavior. So if he changes his behavior, and in that I think that the international community could play an important role, then he wouldn't be a problem anymore.
Do you think that then he can change his behavior and act democratically?
All can change our behavior. until the day we die, we have the opportunity to change our behavior. For example, President Bush is giving President Saddam Hussein the opportunity to change his behavior. If he doesn't, then
Sir, as I understand it, a large factor in Venezuela's current crisis is the opposition-led general strike attempting to place pressure on President Chavez. Does that show any sign of working and placing political pressure? And if not, how much longer do you think it can continue?
well, I think we are, in general, I mean, if we read history, and our leaders apparently don't read much history, general strikes have a tendency to fail. And so you have to be very careful when proposing a general strike, because in some times, and England is a good case, it can reinforce. Right now, the problem is that through the mismanagement by the government and some mistakes they have made, and the effects of the general strike, I think we will face difficult times ahead. I mean, the government has not been able to put the oil industry back to what it previously was. So if they do not agree to rehire all the 17,000 people they dismissed, I think we will have serious economic problems ahead of us.
Good afternoon, Mr. Granier. I have a quick question. You, as a CEO of one of the largest media company in Venezuela, I wonder what are your challenges and opportunity in a country like that? I mean, what are your focus right now on the business perspective?
We face a difficult situation. We are used to it. I mean, I've been in journalism since I was 11, and I've had to face difficult situations before. And the relationship between government and media has never been easy, not even in a democratic society, much less in an authoritarian society like we have right now. So our main concern, of course, is to survive, to keep as many people employed as we have right now, not to lose our strength, and our strength lies in the quality of the people who work for us. And I'm pretty sure we will survive. We've been in business, I mean, this corporation has been in business for more than 100 years. We were the first radio station in the country. We are the first TV station in the country. I'm sure we will survive.
No.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Granier, for being with us today. We have enjoyed very much, and I believe we have learned a lot about the Venezuelan situation. We will now have some Venezuelan coffee and chocolates.
Enjoy it. Thank you. Ya terminamos.
Papi.